My mother passed away when I was still in kindergarten. Since then, my dad raised me single-handedly.
You have to live honestly and truthfully.
My dad always told me to live honestly and truthfully. My dad was, as he said, a straightforward and honest man. To put it mildly, he was a direct person, but to say it bluntly, he was the type of person who cannot read the room. I have seen him get into trouble many times since I was a child. Still, thanks to his honest personality, people always gathered around him. I love my dad like that. When I was in elementary school, a classmate of mine was pulling a joke on the teacher, and she was upset. I reported what the boy was doing. My classmates hated me, calling me a snitch.
I'm proud that you are so honest.
But my dad praised me like that. I was developing a personality just like my dad's. This personality, however, gradually became an issue, and my relationship with my dad began to worsen. When I became a junior high school student and had my first boyfriend, due to my honest personality, I told my dad about it. Then, my dad said,
Having a boyfriend as a middle school student is inappropriate.
And he became enraged and called my boyfriend while I cried and attempted to stop him.
Stop dating my daughter. It's annoying.
That's what he told my boyfriend. Of course, I went to school the next day and apologized to him, but he was totally taken back and refused to date me. It was the first time in my life that I had my heart broken because of my dad. When I was a little girl, my dad was my favorite dad, who was honest and loved me a lot. But as I grew older, I realized his devotion simply served to dominate me. He only gave me a $20 allowance when I was in high school because he didn't want me to become a delinquent. While my friends were shopping for clothes, going to cafes after school, and having fun, I couldn't have the same fun as everyone else, and I was upset. I couldn't hide it from my dad when I started working part-time without telling him. He came to my part-time work right away and forced me to quit.
You don't need money to hang out with your real friends.
That's what he said. No matter how hard I fought against him, he would never change his mind. I knew his stubbornness better than anyone else. I spent my third year of high school simply going back and forth between school and home, reluctantly accepting my dad's restrictions. At school, I was mocked for being a sheltered girl. But I came up with all kinds of ways to have fun that didn't involve spending money. And I spent time with my friends, conversing over cheap snacks from the store and soaking in the sun at the park. I made friends who would join me in these activities. It took me a long time to realize that my dad's remarks could have been true. So, at the moment, all I wanted was to be free of my dad. That was all I could think about. I went to a popular cafe in front of the station with a friend near the conclusion of my sophomore year of high school. I had rarely eaten out with friends. I had wanted to go to this cafe for a long time, and I was able to make it happen since I had been saving my tiny allowance diligently in order not to spend it. I was so impressed by the cake I ate there. Then, I began to dream of becoming a pastry chef. I had been reluctant to tell my dad what I really wanted to do. However, I was forced to inform my dad about my dream during path counseling. In fact, my dad also ran a pasta shop, and he liked food-related stuff. So he was happy to support my dream.
I knew you were my daughter when you recognized the appeal of food.
He said that with joy. But at that time, I didn't tell my dad what I was really up to. I had applied to a confectionery school in a remote location that I had to fly to get there. I intended to leave home after school, receive a scholarship, and live on my own. But the morning of the day of that exam, I was about to leave early in the morning without telling my dad about the exam. My dad, who was usually still sleeping, came out of his room and spoke to me.
"Where are you going, Emma?"
Why did he have to get up so early on that specific day? Of course, I didn't notify my dad that I'll be staying overnight because the exam was in a far location. Oh, didn't I tell you? I'm staying at Sophia's house today. I've been to her house before, and you said it was okay, right, Dad? Of course, it was a lie, but I told Sophia to tie up loose ends.
"Are you hiding something from me?"
My dad said, as if he saw through something. Nothing. What are you talking about? I tried to act casually, hoping that he wouldn't notice anything. Because if he finds out I'm traveling far away to take the exam, he'll undoubtedly stop me. But I was reminded that this was already an immature idea of mine.
Sigh. When did you become such a child? Lying to your father.
My dad stated this exaggeratedly. As I said, I'm not lying, I said desperately.
Because you didn't tell me anything about your path, I had to call your school teacher and ask. She informed me that you would apply to a school far away from here, so I told her to cancel the application.
I couldn't believe what he said. What?
I submitted your application to a school that was within walking distance of our house. I heard that the school building was newly renovated last year, and they have all the facilities.
I was speechless, yet my dad said this to me without offense.
I wouldn't have to go through all of this if you had been honest with me from the start and asked me about finding a school.
I couldn't take it anymore. That's enough! That's why I tried to attend a school far away from you. All you do is control me, and you won't let me do anything. I'm sick of living like this. Even if I live my life as you taught me, nothing good will come of it. I have always obeyed my dad as much as possible. My dad was startled and disappointed, since this was the first time I had ever rebelled to this extent.
I did everything for you.
But I interpreted him and said, You did everything for yourself. With that, I shut myself up in my room. From that day on, I avoided my dad more and more. I didn't want to attend the school where my dad forced me to apply, so I skipped the entrance exam. I didn't go to school after graduating from high school and was unemployed. I eventually began hanging out with the wrong people among my high school classmates and became involved in the night entertainment business. Watching me like that, every time he saw me, my dad said, What happened to your dream of becoming a pastry chef? You only get one life. Are you certain you want to live this way? But I was so annoyed that I ignored him. After a year of this, I began staying at the home of a guy I met at the club. I didn't even go home anymore. I got the money and freedom I wanted, but I was somewhat miserable and always sad. I looked at the cakes that my clients gave me as gifts, but when I gazed at them, my heart tightened and I imagined the bright future I was going to have. If my dad had not been like that, I would not be in this situation. I was aware that I had made my own decision, but I had to blame someone else in order to keep my mind calm. I didn't know what to do with myself anymore. I had several calls from my dad on my phone every day, but I never answered them. Then, one day, my dad, who was typically at home, was not present when I returned home to grab some clothes from my room at his house. I assumed he was worried about me, but I was surprised because I assumed he, too, had been hanging out. I was getting ready to depart when I noticed a scrap of paper on the living room table. It was a letter from my dad.
Dear Emma, thank you for coming home. This will always be your home.
It's not like I came home because I wanted to. I looked down and saw the rest of the letter.
I had to be hospitalized for some reason. If you miss me, come see me.
Then, the address of the hospital was carefully written. What was my dad doing in a hospital? I forgot we were still fighting and rushed to the hospital where it was written, surprised by something I hadn't expected. It had been more than a year since I had returned home, but when had he been hospitalized? Is he doing well? I had taken it for granted that my dad was doing well until now. I was terrified of what would happen if he disappeared. When I arrived at the hospital and gave the nurse the name of my dad, she led me to his room. My dad was lying on the bed, looking dazed and somewhat thin. He didn't look like the man I knew. Just seeing him like that made me feel like crying. Dad? When I called out to him, he turned to face me.
Emma, you came.
He smiled at me. With the nurse's help, my dad raised his upper body and sat down on the bed. He invited me to come to visit him when I was lonely, but he was the one who wanted me to come to see him. I was relieved to see my dad smiling so brightly, wondering which of us was being dishonest. But then,
you know, my condition has deteriorated significantly, and I may not live another year.
That's what he told me. Seeing my dad's changed appearance made me sad, but I had no choice but to accept it. Then, I was overwhelmed with regret. If I had not left home, I might have noticed his illness. Maybe his constant worry about me was harming his health. I've always blamed my dad and never attempted to do something about it. I was such an idiot. I'm sorry. I could only apologize while crying like that. Then,
there is no need to apologize. You were right. You should live your life the way you want to. I'm the one who should apologize. I've wanted to apologize for a long time.
And he patted my head as I sobbed. I felt embarrassed because I was already an adult, but the warmth I got from my dad, which I hadn't felt in a long time, gave me confidence and bravery. The next day, I quit from the nightclub where I was working. I thought about attending a confectionery school, but I thought that I might not make it while my dad was still alive. I went to several cake shops to negotiate directly. The 6th cake shop I went to hired me, and I began my patissier training on site. I started my patissier training at the shop. Of course, I was not allowed to make cakes at first. I started by washing equipment, working at the cash register, and so on. However, I was allowed to use the kitchen after business hours. So, I worked diligently on my cakes every day. And every day, I would go to my dad and talk about the day. To make up for the days we hadn't seen each other, I would take time to learn how to make cakes and visit Dad. The cake that originally saved my heart. I wanted my dad to eat it someday. I wanted to make something that will save my dad's heart. That's what I came to think. 2 years have passed since I started my cake training. My dad was told he would not live a year, but miraculously, he was still healthy enough to talk. Maybe he was waiting for me so that he could eat my cakes. I couldn't stop making cakes because of this, no matter how tired I was. Finally, the day came when I could have my dad to eat the cake. I used something dental on his body, obtained clearance from the hospital, and excitedly entered the hospital room where my dad was waiting. Of course, I was overjoyed since I was going to offer the cake to my dad. But, in fact, I had one more thing to tell him. A cake made with muscat, my dad's favorite.
It's so delicious. I'm proud of you. I've never had such a delicious cake in my life. It's the best in the world. I had no idea you could make such a beautiful cake.
My dad ate it while praising me over and over again. You know, I wanted to talk to you about something. With that, I invited my boyfriend, whom I had been dating for nearly a year, into the hospital room. He had been a regular customer at the cake shop where I worked. He started chatting to me when I looked tired and concerned. He had always been there for me in my times of need, and he proposed to me the other day. I wanted to report my marriage to my dad. My dad was quite surprised, but he was happy with tears. I hadn't told him about my lover since junior high school when my dad made me phone him and end the relationship. So I was frightened on the inside, but I was relieved that my dad was content. I was just 22 years old and had never imagined getting married so soon. But I was happy to be able to comfort my dad. I'm glad that your dad was happy, my fiancé Jack said to me as we left the hospital room. Me too. Thank you for coming today. I adored Jack's sweet smile. Oh yeah, about the ceremony. Your dad was smiling today, but his condition doesn't look so good. Why don't we just have the wedding for the two of us, without inviting anyone else? And we can come back and photograph you in your wedding gown. I'm sure that your dad will be pleased. Jack was concerned about my dad's condition, who was not allowed to leave the house. So he came up with such a plan. He cared more about my dad than himself. I felt really happy to be able to marry him. 3 months have passed since then. We decided to hold our wedding ceremony at a small chapel in the countryside, a little outside the city center. After the ceremony, we were going to go and register a marriage and report it to my dad. It was the first wedding dress I had ever worn in my life. I really wanted to show it to my dad in person, but I'm hoping he'll be pleased to see it in photographs. When the chapel doors opened and I was about to enter the chapel where Jack was waiting, I felt like I heard my dad's voice. If my dad had been here in good health, I might have cried out loud. As I was thinking this, somebody suddenly pulled my arm. My dad's voice was not a hallucination. Emma, let's go. My dad was not supposed to be there, took my arm and tried to lead me out of the chapel. Dad, why are you here? My dad was wobbling and had difficulty walking properly. It's because your life is in danger. Get in. My dad stated it in an unusual tone and forced me into a cab that he appeared to have taken to get here. Then, to Jack, who came after me to see what was going on, he said, I can't let you marry Emma. With that, he let the driver drive. To be honest, I was suddenly recalling what had happened to my first love. On the ride home, I wanted to ask him what was going on. But my dad was dazed and unable to communicate, possibly because he had forced himself to move. I was more concerned about my dad than the meaning of his acts until we arrived at the hospital. When we got to the hospital, I discovered that my dad had gone without authorization, and his condition had deteriorated to the point where he was transferred to the intensive care unit. But there was no room to recover, and I, as a family member, was called to the ICU. It was to be our last time together. I changed out of my bridal gown and into a sterile surgical gown. My dad looked at me for the last time. I wish you happiness in your life, he mumbled quietly. Those were his last words. Later, I went to my dad's hospital room and discovered a letter with a will written on it. Looking inside, I discovered that it was not a will, but rather a letter written entirely to me.
Dear Emma, thank you for being my daughter. Thank you for letting me eat the most delicious cake in the world. I am more than happy that you have achieved your dream. I wish you happiness from now on and forever and ever. That has never changed since you were a little girl. I've always meddled in your affairs and made things difficult for you. I may have been a bad father, not realizing it until you told me. But please, allow me to meddle one more time. I wanted to believe in the person that you believed in. But I couldn't help wondering if he was the one who would make you happy. That's why I asked the detective to look into it. That young man is someone who takes advantages of people's happiness in marriage to rob them of their hearts and money. You may not believe it. You may hate me. It's okay. But I still want you to be happy. I want you to be happy with someone honest and sincere. Thank you. I love you. From Dad.
He was not always a person with beautiful handwriting. But I could tell from the weekly written letters how hard he worked to write them. It was a fact that I didn't want to believe, but I knew that my dad was an open and truthful man. And, as to prove it, even after the bride was gone, I didn't hear a word from Jack, and his phone was disconnected. Now that I think about it, he asked me to provide him with funds to run a cafe for the two of us. There were several questionable things, but, blinded by love, I had complete faith in him. My dad meddled with his helplessly stupid daughter until the very end. I gripped the will that my dad had left me and couldn't stop crying until it was wrinkled with tears. Time passed and I turned 28 years old. I work as a pastry chef on my own, and I am getting married to the love of my life today. I continue to be an honest and straightforward person, as my dad said. Then, I began to have people assist me who were similarly honest and forthright. I believe I am now the kind of person, blessed with warm relationships, that I saw in my dad as a child. I was a fool, though, and I couldn't do anything for my dad. But if my dad's intention was for me to be happy, I guess I can finally demonstrate my filial piety. I wish my dad in heaven to be happy now, too.